Welcome to another episode of the ResiBuild podcast, Constructive Conversations. I'm here today with Shaun Weston, who's the MD of British Offsite and also a board director of Weston Homes, a tier one developer of residential units in the UK. So firstly, thank you for joining us, Shaun. Glad to have you. We're looking forward to a bit of a sentiment of what's happening in the industry right now, a bit of a state of the house building sector. So start off by telling us a little bit about who you are and your background.
Yeah, of course. Great to be here with you. Thank you for inviting us into the conversation. But as you mentioned, I'm managing director at British Offsite, which is an off-site manufacturer of light gauge steel panels. And then also, I still retain my directorship at Weston Homes PLC. So you might find that my answers potentially come from two slightly different places, but always invested in the future and the success of the industry at the end of the day. So
Sure. And tell us a little bit about the relationship between British Offsite and Weston Homes.
It's I'm a site manager by trade, and joined the Weston Homes board probably 8 years ago now, something like that, 9 years ago. Within Weston Homes, I was responsible for the internal plant hire division. When we ended up getting into supplying construction materials, which then led into manufacturing our first item. So our oldest product is it's kind of like a bathroom pod, but not within a room. It's a vanity unit system, and then that led us to essentially take on more off-site construction. And that's when we incorporated British Offsite. So British Offsite is a subsidiary of Weston Group, a sister company to Weston Homes. We obviously work very closely together, but British Offsite is also out in the market selling to other tier one, tier two main contractors, developers, housing associations, all sorts of different marketplaces. So, it's a symbiotic relationship. 90% of my time's over at British Offsite, but always got a very, very keen interest in the private developer side of life as well.
Yeah, sure. So starting off with kind of the sentiment in the marketplace at the moment, where you feel that the industry is, tell us a little bit about your point of view, both from that developer point of view, but also from an off-site manufacturer point of view.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's pretty fair to say that certainly the private residential side of the industry, is finding it difficult at the moment. You can see, housing starts are pretty low, particularly inside built-up cities like London and Manchester. And there's some challenges there, and hopefully we're going to get a little bit of a chance to talk about that today. Having said that, though, there is definitely positivity in the public sector. Yeah. Whether that is still within the living space, so housing associations and for-profit RPs and not-for-profit RPs. Certainly, we've got things like the MOD single living accommodation. The Department for Justice is still working. So it's not that the market's totally in the doldrums, but there's a big part of it at the moment, which it's, I wouldn't say it's quite stalled. Yeah. But it's not where we need it to be. Certainly not if we're going to deliver 1.5 million homes in this Parliament, which everyone is very committed to. I think it's fair to say that the Labour government that we currently have certainly put their money where their mouth is with the planning system. Yeah. Which is really, really encouraging to see. We have a revised national planning policy framework coming through. There's various bills making their way through Parliament. So that's a really, really good news story. I don't really want to sell property at the end, and we need housing completions. I certainly don't want the industry to lose sight of that, because there's been great progress. But as a manufacturer, I personally like to think of the development process like a production line. And at the start of the production line, we have to secure land and we have to secure planning, and that's great. We've made an improvement there. But we still have bottlenecks further down the process. Yeah. We have bottlenecks around certainly the Building Safety Regulator. I think everyone in the industry is kind of up to speed on that now, but there's still challenges that need to be solved. And then when we certainly get to disposing of property at the end, trying to get people into homes, trying to make mortgages available, and particularly the first time buyer side of private for sale, residential. That's really, really difficult at the moment.
That's interesting. We'll pick up on some of those points as we go through. But just starting off with that manufacturer viewpoint and the pipeline and so on, there's definitely very much a buzzword around industrialised construction and so on. This is being seen in various markets. People are advocating it in terms of a way of solving the challenges with not hitting net housing targets. Now, I appreciate a lot of the housing targets may be tied up with the BSR piece. We'll touch on that in a second as well. But what's your thoughts around industrialised construction? What is it? Is it a rebrand? Is it a different way of looking at things? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think it would be a little unfair to say it's just a rebrand with MMC, because I think MMC as a concept was really necessary at a point in time to start getting the powers that be and the public thinking about what the next generation of construction needed to look like. It was also presented in quite a revolutionary way, as developers or main contractors or whichever part of the industry you sit within. There's specific categories. It's very, very carefully thought through how you needed to go at MMC with regards to essentially revolutionising your process. In a scale from small process improvements right the way through to a house on the back of a lorry. Yeah. So like I say, I think they very much serve this purpose at a point in time. Now the industry has, essentially, I think the Modernise or Die report's 9 years old now. Yeah, something about like
that. That would be
and we've been through some economic ups and downs along the way as well, and I think it would be fair to say that now at this point, the industry understands that the various MMC categories, where they're successful, maybe where they're less successful, because it's very much horses for courses. It's easy to get stuck on, maybe some of the volumetric suppliers, which haven't been successful, but then equally, you can look at, certainly some of our peers in the offsite sector, like Reds 10, they're delivering single living accommodation for the MOD, and they're doing really, really well. Yeah. So I think it's about the industry understanding that, those specific parts work in specific places. Yeah. That then leads us into the concept of industrialised construction, which I think is now us essentially looking to normalise what was MMC as a big revolutionary piece, So, you think about what British Offsite produces, like I say, it's a 2D light gauge steel closed panel system. It's very easy to now, under the industrialised construction banner, for people to say, okay, so now that's not some weird, wonderful avant-garde, construction methodology. Now it's about us changing our thinking and building more efficient industrialised construction processes into our everyday. Yeah. So in that regard, I think it's a very, very healthy way for us to think about offsite construction going forwards, or industrialised construction. Some of it's offsite, some of it's on-site. It's about improving processes at a very, very practical level.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way of explaining it, Shaun. I think it's that move away from just thinking as kind of MMC became kind of almost another way of saying volumetric to a certain degree. And it's that more practical approach we're seeing in more markets, where there's the flexibility to adopt different panel systems and so on, and make things work within the remit of planning and within actually a later stage adopting it, rather than having to start really, really, really early with deciding major decisions about modular units and so on. So interesting point there. But moving the conversation on slightly, sometimes it's talked about as being a way of addressing a number of the challenges around BSR and so on. Be interested in your take on that. People talk about it as kind of the quality control, the competence and so on is much more controllable in a factory. And yes, it is, but I'd be interested in understanding your sort of viewpoint on that.
No, I think that almost goes without question, if I'm perfectly honest. I think some of the challenges that we have, and I'll put my developer hat on here for a minute. Some of the challenges that we have when we're making Gateway 2 applications is that it potentially interferes with the commercial process. Essentially, you have to pin your colours to the mast on what suppliers or what parts of your supply chain you want to use quite early on in the process. Yeah. So, I mean, for I can only really talk from a British Offsite perspective in terms of our personal experiences. You have to pull people away from what they would consider kind of a generic SFS solution to say, actually, we're going to use Unisystem specifically. But then you do get the advantage. I mean, particularly with our product, we take the work of what could be 4 or 5 independent trades and homogenize it into one carefully accredited, quality controlled panel. So I think what I'm trying to say is that there's pros and cons. Yes, it does mean that a developer or main contractor or a principal designer needs to focus on our product quite early in the process. I mean, in some ways, though, there's an upside to that, is that actually it gives a client some cost certainty earlier on in the process. But it does mean that you then don't really engage with a traditional later stage tendering process. So like I say, pros and cons. But then once you get past that, what you have is that level of certainty through Gateway 2, but particularly when you get to Gateway 3 at the end. When people are asking for, like you say, you're making a submission, you need to demonstrate your quality control procedure, you need to be able to evidence it, you need to be able to evidence the competency of the people who have worked on that structure. It means that rather than having to pull across, like I say, in our experience, because we do that part of the facade, rather than having to pull across 4 independent trades and say, did your operator have the right, your tradesperson have the right skills in the competency matrix, this big administrative task, uncertain task, trying to get that done. What you can do is, because I mean, ultimately, particularly by the time you're at Gateway 3, people want to hand the building over. They want to get their money in at the end of the day. And there's a really critical point there, is that there is distinct finance cost of that administrative process. And actually, if you can go to one place and say, give me all your stuff, there you go, Mr. Building Safety Regulator, with a level of certainty, ultimately that's going to get money in your bank account faster.
And historically, that process would have been going to a major contractor who then probably got subcontractors there going to collect that information. Whereas a factory like this, you've got the information yourselves. You're shortening that chain, but also that early stage enabling the rationalization of buildings and detailing, which means that the details which go through the gateway are probably more buildable and more constructible. Some interesting points there, but I'd like to sort of move on more generally to kind of what you finding, what's your experience with the gateway processes? I appreciate you've gone through a few now. A Gateway 2. Tell us a little bit about that. What you found, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you like.
Well, look, I think what is good about the gateway process is that although it might be uncomfortable for the industry, it's definitely forcing everyone to up their game. And that is quite make a really arbitrary statement there. There's a big spectrum of, people who are engaging with the regulator with different levels of, competency in their submissions. From, I'm sure at the worst end, there are, people who are making applications who definitely don't have the right information on it. They definitely don't have the right design teams. And they're being forced to really up their game. Equally, and I can speak pretty confidently for my sister company, Weston Homes, is that the information pack they make in their Gateway 2 submission actually has a really, really strong level of coordination and of detail. And that actually kind of helps them play to some of their strengths. So, from that perspective, it is the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do. Obviously, the challenge is how we make that a streamlined, cohesive, fast process. Because at the end of the day, the delays it takes to get through those gateways materializes in finance costs, and that then washes out as increased property costs for end users, for real people. There is a cost to the real person, real family who wants to buy that apartment. I'm not saying we shouldn't have the regulator process, because as I say, it is driving better practices and the right behaviours. But there is also an outturn for Joe Public as well. What I would definitely say in my experience is that the multidisciplinary teams, quite often you'll make one application and you'll have one MDT and they'll be very, very fire safety focused.
Yeah.
And you'll make an application to another MDT and they'll be very structure focused. And another one will have another focus. And I think that's one thing that I would suggest to the regulator, is to try and improve consistency in that auditing process. I think as well, certainly the last application we made, you get to sign off, and I think that at least at that point in time there was maybe only 7 or 8 people in the entire country who could put a wetting signature on the bottom of a Gateway 2 application, and they carry so much responsibility. You know, if they make mistakes, potentially they're in jail, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I would do that job, if I'm perfectly honest. So I think to make sure that those individuals are, certainly have to be fairly compensated for that risk, and you need to make sure you've got an adequate volume of them, because it's going through, loads and loads of applications, getting into an ever tightening funnel, and you get to the end, and you have 8 people. You're a very, very limited pool of people who can make that decision, and they have huge amounts of responsibility and consequences if they make the wrong ones. So inevitably, they then say, right, what about this, back it goes, comes in again. Well, what about this, and this? Yeah, I don't care that I didn't think about it the first time. I'm thinking about it right now because it's my name on the bottom of the piece of paper. And I'm very empathetic to that personally. Yeah. But I think that these are the areas where if we were looking to improve the gateway process in the future, that's definitely some of the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, interesting. And are you finding, since the MHCLG took it on from the HSE, are you finding...
Well, I haven't really yet.
But they've introduced a new process. We're seeing more come through now, being approved.
Yeah.
And they've got I wouldn't want to call it a fast track. I know that was the wording they used on there, but there's a new route which seems to be bringing things through quicker.
Yeah, I think although they haven't fully handed over yet, because of the nature of the HSE, they are a very binary organisation. Yes, it's no. Yeah. No, there's no kind of grey in the middle. It's black and it's white. Yeah. And we all know in construction that to keep things moving, sometimes it has to be a little bit of grey. Yeah. And that's not necessarily about people making poor quality decisions or kind of glossing over things that they shouldn't gloss over. Not at all. I think that's about the cultural approach, how computer says no, do you want to be through that process, and how much do you want to say, actually, we've got the main things that we need. Yeah. There's a few items there that we need to come back to later. It's a bit like planning application, isn't it? You can have reserved matters. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you're going to throw up a really, really badly designed building. It just means that you have to be pragmatic with the process. And I hope we will get that from the MHLGC. Yet to be seen, though. They are still in that transitional period.
Yeah, we're hearing good things from the conversations we've been part of. Anyway, we're seeing more of a shift from being absolutely frustrated with the BSR to more kind of actually people are seeing some positive, a light at the end of the tunnel, if you like. Yeah. Certainly not there, as you say, but hopefully coming soon.
No, I think there was always going to be a settling down period.
Yeah,
that was always going to happen, and particularly when you're and this is one thing that I would say, whether it's within the HSE or the MHLGC, it's not staffed with individuals from the industry. Yeah, don't have those experiences. And it's taking much longer than the government ever set out for those organisations to start gleaning that experience and understanding what levers to pull or not to pull.
So moving the conversation slightly on to regulatory uncertainty and so on, obviously tied in with the whole BSR piece as well, but what's your take on regulatory situation at the moment and any uncertainty around changes there?
Look, I think the uncertainty at the moment ultimately feeds into delivery. Because people, understandably, are reluctant to press go on projects and to press go on orders. I'm sure, speaking from Sapphire's perspective, you can get an order, but actually trying to get somebody to say, let's start the project is, well, you can't make them, can you, for a start? And that's what uncertainty does. And whether it's regulatory uncertainty or whether it's, market uncertainty or buyer confidence or whatever it might be. I think it's the uncertainty at the moment which is probably one of the bigger risks to the 1.5 million homes in this Parliament.
So unpacking those points individually, which one of those would you say is the sort of highest priority to address?
I mean, for me, I think nobody makes a sale until the property is handed over to a customer.
Yeah.
If a developer can't sell a property to a customer, they're not going to place an order with a designer or somebody in the supply chain. You're not going to place orders of sapphire balconies with your suppliers for metal. Nobody makes a sale until the sale's made.
Yeah.
So I think that certainly from my perspective, and again, half with the British Offsite hat on, half with the Weston Homes hat on, selling property needs to really move up the agenda now. We're already, nearly 2 years into this Parliament, a year and a half. The scope for getting anywhere near to 1.5 million homes is, rapidly decreasing.
Yeah.
It was ambitious to start with. To be fair, the government made no kind of no bones about that. They knew it was an ambitious target, but you don't want it to slide from ambitious into fantasy.
Yeah.
And that needs a bit of action around it pretty soon. I think also as an industry, without being too doom and gloom, there is a startling amount of insolvencies and failures with it, and all the way through the supply chain. Whether it's developers, whether it's main contractors, whether it's specialist subcontractors. I think probably specialist subcontractors have taken the worst kicking. I think there's lots of good quality businesses that haven't made and probably will continue not to make it through the end. There needs to be some changes made.
Interesting. And this ties up very much. I was hearing yesterday a roundtable discussion that the sort of average slippage of revenue for specialist subcontractors to construction is currently about 30 to 40%.
Yeah, and that sounds absolutely right, because if you said your housing starts are down 40%, which means your orders are down 40%, it flows right the way through the supply chain. I mean, and even right the way to the kind of most fundamental parts of the supply chain. People like British Steel and Tata.
Yeah,
that will flow through to them eventually. As well. Everyone is going to suffer that all the way through. And there's no way around it.
So I know last time we talked about a tier one developer had written a report about the cost of new homes and so on.
Indeed.
Anything in there which was of interest to you, which you think would be worth sharing?
I mean, look, I think probably the biggest challenge to selling property to individuals at the moment is around mortgageability, but a big underlying part of that is affordability.
Yeah.
And I'll start off by talking about mortgages, if you don't mind, because for me, that is, if I was going to ask our current government for one thing, that's where I'd ask them to focus on. We saw Kemi Badenoch's keynote speech at the Conservative conference, and it's great that she's talking about things like stamp duty and everything helps, right? But the number one challenge at the moment is getting an everyday person into a mortgage that the lender is willing to give them. Yeah. That's kind of one of the main stopping points at the moment, is that the reality is, and I know there are 95% mortgage products out there in the market at the moment, but if you actually get into the term sheets of those mortgages, if you can adhere to the term sheet, you don't really need a 95% mortgage. The issue that we have is around deposit levels, but then also around how many times earnings they'll lend you. Yeah. If you have, if you lived inside London, inside the M25, you probably won't get a one bed now for less than, say, 300 grand. Yeah. And at 5 times earnings, that is at a high enough level to exclude a lot of people from owning property. And if you were going to ask me one thing that we need, and it might not have to be Help to Buy, because that ultimately was a little bit of a Pandora's box. Yeah, and it was quite hard to pack that back down. But giving first-time buyers the ability and some support from the government to obtain affordable mortgages is priority number one.
Yeah.
If you want to get to 1.5 million homes in this parliament or even close to it, that's the bit you need to solve.
Yeah.
Mortgageability and making those properties affordable. So going back though to the piece that was written by Barclays, which I absolutely have no problem plugging because I think it was absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
If any of your readers want to, go back to Construction News and have a read of that.
Yeah.
I believe that was Rob Perrin's note about improving delivery inside London. Whether it's the Building Safety Regulator, whether it's normal construction cost increases, inflationary increases,
Yeah.
whether it's the fact that finance and borrowing has become more and more difficult because the finance industry wants to de-risk everything.
Yeah.
All of those things, and ultimately, and I'm very, very pro the net zero drive on a really personal level. I have two small children who we're only borrowing the planet today for them in the future. So I'm very, very pro net zero. It comes at a cost.
Yeah.
All these things come at a cost. The future home standard will come at a cost. And you bundle all of these elements together and wrap that in with what has been a static housing market. And you get to a point now where you have some really, really fundamental problems around affordability.
Yeah.
Really fundamental problems. I mean, and particularly at the lower end of the market as well. If you were a main contractor at the moment trying to deliver a 2 up, 2 down house, you probably got a build cost optimistically around the £220 a square foot mark, pessimistically at the £300 a square foot mark. And if you then said, actually, I'm in an area where I only have a end sales value of £400 a square foot, and I still need to make a profit, pay the bank, pay for the land, it just stops working. It doesn't fit. It just doesn't fit. And I think there's a little bit of rhetoric out there, certainly in central government. Well, we'll just take it from the land value, and it just doesn't work like that either. If you were a landholder, it might be some family silver. You might only get one chance to dispose of it. You wouldn't do it right now. You'll wait until the next government, until reform comes in or Conservatives come in, and you get slightly better market conditions. And affordability is a real issue at the moment. And like I say, whether you liked it or not, Help to Buy or schemes like that they don't solve those problems. They do mask it, but they mask it in a way that keeps the economy moving because people are buying property.
Yeah, sure. So this challenge isn't unique to the UK. Affordability has been talked about in all the major markets, all over the world. But there are things which have changed here. There's obviously a lot of uncertainty, especially with the budget, the autumn budget, now not likely to be until winter. What's your thoughts around that? There's been things talked about as property tax, there's various things being speculated upon. But what's your thoughts around the current sort of situation? What is there certain uncertainty around that, or is that already kind of factored into?
No, I think there's a huge amount of uncertainty around that. I think it's dangerous to think that any more tax hikes will actually increase the HMRC's net take without there being a buoyant market. I'm not an economist, so it'd certainly not be right for me to say, just adding more taxes won't work at all. I can only speak for personal experience, as somebody who sits, within the middle class. And if somebody said to me right now, I'm going to eliminate your council tax, but I'm going to put on a property tax, and the only reason they're going to be doing that is because they can get more money out of people like me. That won't work very well unless there's a buoyant market where I can earn as an individual. So I'd be really, really cautious about essentially another tax raid on individuals. If it was down to me to pull the levers, I would be saying, look, we need to stimulate the market. We need to, certainly with a construction hat on, we need to get people buying property. We need to see a flow of money through the industry. And I would also be saying, stop trying to tax me, the individual, when there's big businesses who could definitely afford it, who aren't paying their fair share.
in terms of kind of wrapping that conversation up about sort of demand side reality and mortgages and the dynamics of it, is there anything as an industry we could potentially do which would help the situation, or does it really need the government to step in and actually make this 1.5 million homes, which is quite quickly really growing the numbers which need to be achieved each year with the shortfalls we've had so far? But is there anything we can do, or does it need that government intervention?
I think it's about teamwork.
Yeah,
I think it's about teamwork, and I think it's about the government and the industry both aligning, because we are going to need some market stimulus, in my opinion. I don't think there's any other way around that. And I think if the industry tries to deal with that internally, it's going to be really, really ineffective. Equally, I think if the government does put in market stimulus and the industry's not ready or hasn't done its part to make sure that it can deliver, that's equally going to be ineffective. I think both those elements need to happen at the same time.
Yeah.
And we do need to keep a careful eye on skill shortage, because let's assume that you and me sitting here, we've got a magic wand and they bring back Help to Buy in the winter budget, which I don't think will happen, unfortunately, but let's say it did, and all of a sudden the market roars to life. All of the labour shortages that we've all been concerned about in the past but have been masked over the last few years will very, very quickly boil up to the surface. Whether it's labour shortages, whether it's deliverable sites, wherever it might be, whether it's orders placed, we have to be ready, and we have to do our part as an industry to be part of that success as well. So I think both things need to happen at the same time.
So, waving your magic wand again, what three things would you suggest you'd like to see happen differently at the moment in the industry, construction industry?
Well, like I say, I think we've done what we need to with planning.
Yeah.
I think it would be great to see, number one priority for me would be buyer support. Having some sort of market stimulus, like I say, whether it's Help to Buy, whether it's a genuine 95% government-backed mortgage, take your pick, whatever your flavour might be. I would definitely have that as one of my wishes. I would, like I say, not try and retreat from the BSR process, because, like I say, I think it is going to deliver the right result. Creating some consistency around those MDTs, and speeding up their process, and trying to get us genuinely towards that 12 weeks. Original timeline for Gateway 2 and 8 weeks for Gateway 3 would be wish number 2. And then I think wish number 3, I'm going to be a bit selfish about this. I want people to place orders with British Offsite, because we can deliver loads of property really fast.
And Sapphire Islands.
At Sapphire, obviously, yeah. More for both of us.
So just wrapping the conversation and kind of, what would your key takeaways be for somebody who'd be watching within the residential construction sector? What are your key takeaways, and what practical things should be considered within the industry at the moment?
Write to your MPs and ask for market stimulus. I think we should all be doing that at the moment. I think we are going to be more effective with central government if we are united in our message. I think, like I say, that's why I have absolutely no problem plugging Berkeley Homes, because I think they're absolutely right, and that's my message, and it should be Sapphire's message. It should be every developer in the land's message. You need to help the industry. You need to help first-time buyers. You need to help property ownership. You need to help affordability. You need to help us get mortgages.
Yeah, and I think picking up the point you mentioned earlier as well about that kind of the constraints in the pipeline process, like a factory and so on, the government needs to zoom out like a helicopter view, see where there's where those constraints are and where the bottlenecks that really make a difference, and work out ways that can be unlocked and so on. BSR being one of them, the selling of properties and so on being another, but also the capacity of the industry and so on.
Yeah, I think it'd definitely be helpful for our Labour MPs, who we placed a lot of faith in when we elected them, to really get lined up to the fact that they're not going to deliver social housing without delivering private residential housing. And even if that means that it's slightly against the traditional Labour manifesto of renting property versus owning property, I think that people need to really wake up to you're going to need both of those to deliver social housing, to deliver 1.5 million homes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Shaun, thank you very much for your time. And to the audience, thank you very much for joining us. And join us for the next podcast shortly. In the meantime, there'll be an event happening in November as well, which is about sustainability, the net zero question. We'll be talking some of the things we've talked about today, but also looking at a longer term futuristic approach for construction and sustainability. Sign up on the ResiBuild website, www.resi.build. Thank you from both of us. Goodbye for now.